And now, finally, for my apology to my girlfriend for shit talking Dandadan for 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about mouthwashing. Remember when I said that my sleep schedule was suddenly fixed? Well, that's because last night I decided around 11 p.m. when I was wide awake to play Mouthwashing, the brand new bite-sized indie horror psychological horror game that has been tearing up the internets that a lot of people have been talking about. Kat was curious about it. I actually bought it for her. We're part of a Steam family now, so we get to do family sharing. So I technically bought it for the both of us, which is actually a very nice part of the family sharing system, is you share libraries. Mouthwashing, it takes about 3 hours, and by the time I finished it, the game was... Mouthwashing is exhausting in a good way, but it's exhausting. And when I finished it, I felt so tired, I just went to bed. I woke up at like 7 p.m. And then I like played the game and was like, I'm fucking going back to bed. And I woke up at like 5 this morning, which again is a little bit early, but is like kind of normal hours for waking up early. So thank you, Mouthwashing, for fixing my sleep schedule by being so heavy. I don't know how much of the game I want to spoil, because I think that you should go I'll give you a taste. I'll give you the first scene, because I think the first scene is a great hook. And I don't think that this really, unless you want to hear absolutely nothing about a game, I think you can stand to hear the first thing that happens. Jesus Christ. So the first thing that happens, I guess I should describe the format of the game. Mouthwashing is essentially a first-person adventure game. Yeah, that's it. That's the gameplay. It's very simple. It's very focused for what it is. It needs to pull off narratively, and I think it's solid. Pretty easy game to play. No complex mechanics. It's a single player first-person adventure psychological horror thing. Adventure game is a weird thing because it's just sort of like a catch-all for, you kind of like move around different areas and pick up items to do little puzzles and stuff like that. I guess that's a lot of horror games, in fact. We need better genre descriptors for like the dynamics of a game. So the opening is you're on a ship. It's a cargo freighter transporting cargo through space. So we're in some kind of future time. I don't remember if they give you a year. The main characters are a small crew that mans the vessel. And when you start out, you are in the cockpit, and there's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of something being kind of off. Part of that is that you get a big alert that you are en route to crashing into an asteroid. So it says the computer's navigation tells you steer to the left, this many degrees to avoid the asteroid. And you can click on it's called the yoke, the steering wheel of like a plane or something, which I think would apply to would a spaceship use terminology for a boat or a plane? I don't know. My mind is blanking on which series prefer one or the other. The steering wheel, you can click on it, and the only option you have is to steer right. At first, I thought it was like a mistake, and I was like, "What? Did I misremember it?" They did say to steer to the left, right? No, so you click steer right, and then the computer's like, "Oh shit, we're en route to hit the asteroid for real, engaging autopilot." So you get up. You've got nothing else you can do with the control panel for the moment. You get up, and you walk around this very small little room of the cockpit, And I click on the door, and it says, I can't let anyone in. And you're like, oh. And the only other thing that you can do is go over to the locker, where you'll find a key. There's a key slot. There's a keyhole on the panel, on the control panel. The controls, with a button, a big red button under glass. You unlock it, press the button, and it says autopilot disengaged. And you get like 0 days before the crash. So that's the opening of the game. As everything, there's some kind of like big fade to white, massive. Oh no, fuck! And then you open the door. And you're walking down this hallway that is just full. It's this cramped corridor that is like full of these posters for some like corporate mascot. You later find out is like the mascot of the company you work for, and just like. Stuff is just steaming and sparking everywhere, and you're going through the doors, and it just keeps going and going and going. And then you hit a dead end. You turn around, and the layout is different when you turn around. And all of a sudden, you turn around again, and there's just like this. It's this mess and maze of pipes, just everywhere, and just almost caving in on you. And there's like this mascot character of like this horse. The company's called the Pony Express something. Transportation, shipping, something like that. And then fade to white crash. So that's the opening of the game. And I think if that interests you, you should go check it out. It's fair. It's like $10 or something. I would give... So first of all, I'm recommending the game. I'm recommending it very highly. I thought this was a great, small, psychological horror experience with a really compelling story and small cast of characters. Small character-driven drama with tons of great moments, some really interesting storytelling, some really interesting... little tricks here and there of stuff that I've never really seen a game do. And yeah, it's a great experience. I think it's phenomenal. 2 thumbs up. So in case anyone's like, now, doesn't care about listening to, or has already played the game or whatever, doesn't mind. So the game is told out of order. You are hopping back and forth between... on the timeline, learning different bits of information. It's one of those games where I was thinking about it and I was like, I feel like if you put everything in order, the story would still work, but I think the way that it's told and the way that it's allowed to there is a lot of hidden information that I think as a player is really interesting. Because there are things that you are playing as a character, and the character knows things that you don't. And the characters know things that you don't. And so the whole sense of... I think there's a decent amount for me of the atmosphere and the tension in the game is how much it feels like you're always missing out on something. That suddenly... months have gone by from the last point, and you don't know if something's happened in between, and something is going on, and someone's at this certain point, and you'll flash forward, and you're like, "What the fuck? When does this? How do we get from A to B?" And it's not just a trick to like drag out a thin plot. It's actually used, I think, to pretty good effect to slowly feed the player information to build up expectations and then subvert them for thematic reasons. And to create a lot of intrigue with how characters actually develop and what you think of each character. There are, I would say, there's two big twists to the game. And maybe one of them I think you could have seen coming, but the other one is almost, I think, is a lot harder to see and is way crazier. I guess, should I just get into spoiling it? You've got this like tiny little cast of characters. You mainly play, so at the start, it's pretty obvious that you're playing as the captain. Who is, you later find out his name Curly. But for most of the game, you're actually playing as a guy named Jimmy. Jimmy kind of becomes the new captain. He was the co-captain, the co-pilot. And now that the main captain Curly has been put out of commission, he is like wrapped up in bandages with just this exposed eye, and he's just in constant pain. And they're just feeding him painkillers to keep him down and kind of ease his suffering. Because the crash is not critical. They're able to survive it. But things are in rough shape. They're running out of food. They're running out of power. And they are just kind of holding out for the thin hope that someone's going to come rescue them. It's honestly a little bit difficult for me to put like in order exactly what happens, because things happen out of order. Things are shown to you out of order. So for most of the game, you're playing as Jimmy, and Jimmy is such an interesting character because it's really hard to get a handle on him at the start. And the more you learn about him, the more it's really interesting to play as a character who is progressively revealed to be a really horrible person. Like a really, really bad person. Again, I guess if you just kind of want to know the story, it's revealed to you. So essentially, there's these moments where you're flashing back to before the crash, and you're playing as, in the flashbacks, you're always playing as Curly. And Curly is clearly having... It's kind of funny because like it starts off with him getting a psychological evaluation from the nurse on the ship, Anya, and he is A-okay. And she says like, yeah, Jimmy's not taking the psych evaluations very seriously. He's just kind of fucking around, and it's kind of annoying me. Because it's sort of important, you know? Curly's like, I'll go talk to him. And you head to the cockpit, and you open the door, and it's just like a black hallway that is way longer than it really is. And you like walk down, and it turns into this massive, almost like you just walk through a door, and you're just in like this ocean of blood, and it's like the craziest hallucination ever. And then you walk through another door, and now you're just in the cockpit again. And Jimmy's just sitting there, and you're like, hey, Jimmy, what's up? I was going to do a psych eval from Anya. Let's just have a little because I know you don't want to, you're not playing very well with her. So you're like, okay, Curly is clearly off his rocker. And then you find out there's this whole, you aren't told exactly what it is at first, but you get a notification from your bosses that the company is being dissolved. They've gone under. And then there's like a little segment in between where you flash forward. And then when you flash back to Curly having to tell the crew about it, it's so hard because it's like you find out they're allowed like one party. They're allowed like one birthday party per voyage. And Curly has to like make the cake, and he's so awkward. He doesn't know what to do. And he basically tells them after you've made the cake that the company is going under and they've all been laid off. And Jimmy just rips into everyone. It is the first time he really comes off as like a real asshole, where he's that I remember at least, and he's just like ripping into like Anya's a failure. She couldn't get into med school. She's just like a fake nurse. Curly, you're this like, you're always acting like you know what to do, but like, oh, you're just gonna leave us all behind because you're the captain. You're like this big. He's so spiteful. The kind of like engineers, the two engineers are Swansea, who is kind of like this older guy. And he's just, I don't remember what he has to say about Swansea, but the intern Daisuke, who's like the best character, he's my favorite guy, who's just like, he's just kind of this goof. He's like a little golden retriever, dumbass guy. And he's like, oh, Daisuke's going to be fine because he's got like his family has money or whatever. He's just a fucking idiot. And then everyone's super depressed. And you have to cut the cake. And you cut the cake by manually moving your mouse up and down. And it is like this awkward, slow, painfully awkward process because it takes so long. The sensitivity is not very high. It takes so long to cut this cake. And I was like, oh, great little, I loved that little instance of using the actual physical act of doing the thing to really put you in the shoes of how uncomfortable it is. So it's kind of making sense that Curly essentially snapped and decided to just kill everyone and was unsuccessful, and they survived the crash. You progress, things happen, you're flashing back and forth, you're finding things out about the characters. And then you find out, when does this happen? So the biggest twist that you discover, the first twist I would say, is that Curly did not cause the crash. It was Jimmy. And I was like, oh, and maybe I could have called that. Maybe it's too obvious that was a setup or something. But I feel like when you don't know why. Essentially what you discover is that Anya has some stability problems and she's not doing too great mentally, even before the crash. And she's having like some suicidal ideation and you go talk to her and she says that she's pregnant. And you're like, what? You're pregnant? We've been on the ship for about 100 days, which means that the only way you could have gotten pregnant, and it's kind of obvious that the only person it could have been is Jimmy. And I actually missed this because the dialogue that I think tells you about it, that implies this, is earlier in the game. So I didn't quite make the connection, but there is a very strong implication that it wasn't consensual, and that, hey, maybe that's why Anya's feeling a little unstable. Because naturally, Jimmy is, first of all, still just an asshole, and two, refuses to take any responsibility. And so what really has actually happened is that Jimmy has some kind of, essentially, once he's confronted about it, his life is kind of over. So not only have they all lost their jobs, but he's also, I don't know what the laws are like in this future world. But he is most likely, the implication is that once he gets back and he has no job, he is also going to have to like face some kind of consequences for being a rapist. Excuse me. And you'll note I was like, oh my God, that's so right. He's the only one on the crew who refused to take psychological evaluations. And you're like, has Jimmy also been undergoing the same kinds of hallucinations and insanity that Curly has been having, but not succumbing to? There's some there's some dialogue between them that suggests that there's some similarities. So Jimmy crashed the ship. Jimmy crashed the ship to, I think, it's basically escape his problems. He was just gonna kill everyone in like essentially a murder suicide kind of thing. And now everyone pretty much everyone survived, and he has to take over responsibility as the captain. And all of these ugly, ugly parts of his personality come out. Like the way that he has this like this real, it puts into such a different perspective how much of a fucking asshole he is, but how much responsibility he has when that's what he wanted in the first place. And second of all, he fucking caused the crash that he now has to take responsibility for. Essentially, all of the things that Jimmy blames on other people. Anya keeps asking him to do this, to give Curly his medicine. He's mad about having to take care of the stuff from the crash. He's mad about how when the crash happened, a bunch of like foam basically filled up all the holes in the ship, and it's blocking off stuff. And he's like, "Fuck, I got to deal with that, and not kill us all by opening a window to space." And it's like, you caused all of these things. Anya has this line really early on where she says that she doesn't think that people should be defined by their worst moments. And what's interesting is that when she's saying it, I kind of get the sense that she's saying it from her own perspective, and that at her lowest points, when she feels the most like just completely giving up, that she doesn't want to judge herself based off of her worst thoughts. And Jimmy basically hears that, and he internalizes that very hard in the direction of, hey man, just because I raped this woman and almost killed all of my coworkers and myself to avoid responsibility for it, that doesn't mean that I'm like a bad guy, right? That doesn't mean that I'm a bad guy. It's really interesting because you're seeing most of the game from Jimmy's perspective. And I think the story, the way that it's told, really warps around that. I think if you weren't able to like really read between the lines, it would be easy. I think it would be easy for a kind of dumb person to play the game and think that Jimmy actually wasn't that bad, because all of his like inner monologuing, and it's all from the perspective of someone who has this massive ego, who why did he rape her? I don't know. I mean it kind of fits in line. I mean, you know, if you think about it, rape is really like, it's a power thing. It's about having power over someone else. And Jimmy expresses that in things like that. He wants to be the captain. And then suddenly he gets the power and he can't handle it. It's actually very in line with his character, you know? When you look at it from anyone else's perspective, it's very obvious that he is like the super villain of the story. But it's not, because of the limited way that you're seeing it. It takes you a while to actually get there. The reason it's called Mouthwashing, oh man, oh my god. So the first kind of thing in the game, like the first, I would say, big, I don't know, one of the early objectives in the game is, okay, the characters are kind of stressed out because they're running out of food. They only have so much food left, and they have less food than they have power, I think was what it was. But they're carrying tons and tons of cargo, and they don't know what the cargo is. So let's see if we can try and break open the cargo hold, because it's all locked. It's all been locked down. So you go, and Jimmy goes and grabs like a pretty neat. I like the little code, the decoder ray. It's essentially like a black light that you can use on certain things in the game to reveal codes for stuff. It's neat. You open up the doors to the cargo bay, and it is this massive, just seemingly endless pallets of boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes, and everyone's like, holy shit, what's in this? And then the game cuts to what is basically like a hallucination. There's these kind of hallucination sequences where you get you're like walking through these essentially like a vision of the cargo bay, and it's just these infinite corridors of boxes, and there's a TV at the end, and you go walk up to the TV and you look through the channels, and you end on a commercial for a mouthwash that tastes great and kills 99% of germs. And then you cut back, and every single box in the cargo bay is just fucking mouthwash. And it's this crushing like moment. It is one of the most, I think, honestly, of any moment in the game, I think that might be, I'm trying to think, that might be one of the most crushing ones, because that's the moment, for me at least, because that's the moment where you feel really fucked. Because before then, there's kind of this element of, well, maybe there might be something in there. Like there could be tons of food. There could be tons of water. Who knows? And they open it up, and it's just, and Anya is reading the label and like the ingredients, and she's going, there's literally too much sugar in this crap for it to disinfect anything. It basically completely neutralizes whatever it could be as a disinfectant, whatever use it has. And as you go on and you're kind of seeing the world through Jimmy's eyes, and it feels like the world kind of starts warping, just the ship just starts getting filled with piles of bottles of mouthwash. And it's like this like core symbol of the game. I think it's important because the game is called Mouthwashing, and I think it works on a number of levels. So first of all, there's this little thing where when you break the news about the company going under, when I think Anya says that Pony Express has been the last manned freight delivery service, like all the other ones have gone under, which implies that basically all the other ones, the whole space has been the whole industry has been automated. And they're like the last non-automated ones, and they just got let off. So there's kind of this like, I look at the mouthwash, and it's like this corporate product that is just useless. It's useless. It's just garbage. It's like landfill waste that they have been transporting, and that of all fucking things they could have been transporting, it was crappy, useless mouthwash. There's this sense of futility and alienation, I think, from like this corporate mass production, how easily they were let go. Something about it. There's so much of this shit, and it's just nothing. It's just meaningless. There's also the thematic illusion, which is that mouthwash is meant to clean your mouth. It's meant to clean you. But this has so much sugar in it that the stuff you use it essentially like promotes more bacteria growth, meaning that your mouth is just as dirty afterwards. And obviously you're playing a character who has done horrible, horrible things. And whatever ways he has to cope with this, that he's still a good person, the metaphorical mouthwash that he can use to clean himself of all the horrible things he's done actually does nothing. He can pretend like it does, but as they discover, the only thing the mouthwash is good for is just getting drunk because of the amount of ethanol in it. It's really just like alcohol. It's just running away. It's alcohol disguised as a disinfectant. And all it's really doing is running away from the bacteria, the dirt. There's another great moment in the climax. I would say that if I have any complaint about the game, it's that the climax part has a few bits that it drags a little bit. The game has quite a bit of momentum. It's very well paced for most of it. In terms of how often you're switching between different time points in time and the information that you're learning and the relatively light puzzling that you're doing. There's a couple points where the game slows down, and most of it happens towards the end. They're clearing all their bases is what's going on. They're wrapping everything up thematically. But there is I feel like it went a little bit long. Not bad enough to be a real complaint, but there's this, essentially the last segment of the game is Jimmy's potent extended hallucination where he is trying to make amends. Everyone is dead. Everyone is dead except for Curly, him and Curly. And he is trying to make amends. He's trying to make amends with everybody, in his mind, spiritually. And he... There's a couple of little maze parts that are a little bit slow, and if you get caught or you die, you just sort of have to reset. But it's a little bit, again, it's a little slow. He's making amends with everyone and taking responsibility is what keeps flashing on screen. Your objective is take responsibility. Take responsibility. Because it's the one thing that he can't really do is take responsibility for what he's done. And it's funny because even when he's talking to these representations of characters like Swansea, he almost can't even bring himself to do it. He just keeps failing. The whole part is a little bit jumbled in my mind because it is very surreal. They have the weirdest pipe puzzle I've ever seen. So there's a bit where you take Curly's body from the medical bay and you bring it to the table in the lounge, and all of the characters, all of the dead characters' corpses have been placed in the chairs, and it's a recreation of the party scene from earlier. And instead of cutting the cake, you're cutting off Curly's leg. And remember how I said it's this really slow, awkward process to cut the cake? With the leg, it's even harder. You essentially have to rapidly drag the mouse up and down to make any progress. And the whole time, Curly is just moaning and squealing and gurgling in agony. And it just goes and goes and I've it's such a cool moment because the physical act that the character is performing is the same as the motion you are making physically in the real world with your arm. And it's so long and your arm is just getting tired and it just keeps, you just can't cut all the way through like the bone and the muscle, and it takes so long, and as you're going the screen just starts distorting and the sound is just breaking apart and just these noises of him writhing on the table, and it's so intense. And it's one of those things that's like, man, you could only do this in a video game. This is why video games are so cool. It is so immersing in the moment of what the character is feeling. It's really, really interesting. It's super cool. Is there, I don't know what I have to talk about. I mean, I don't know. It's a really, it's hard to talk because I mean, the game ends with, so there's this thing set up where Swansea, the kind of head engineer, he's very protective of the utilities closet or the utilities room. He says that it's filled up with, excuse me. He's filled up with, it's filled up with foam from the crash. And if they try to break through it, then it's going to risk, jettisoning, compromising the integrity of the ship. So he is the only one who has the expertise to be able to chop through it, and it's his own private project, essentially. And then you find out that the utilities room was practically untouched. There's like almost no foam in it at all, or there's very completely, they could have gone in it. That's because utilities is where the cryopods are. There's 4 cryopods which can sustain you for 20 years, which, is it guaranteed that you can survive through that? Or that someone will come and rescue you? Not necessarily. But it's 20 years more chance. And all but one of the cryopods has been destroyed. It's been rendered dysfunctional. And you're like, oh, Swansea was basically trying to protect himself. Things happen. You end up shooting him. And eventually the one bit of reconciliation that Jimmy actually does at the very, very end, when everything's spiraled into total chaos, everyone's been killed or killed themselves, or it's very gruesome, is he decides to take the only other person still alive, Curly. He takes his body and places him in the cryopod and then goes off screen and shoots himself. And it's the only way that he can manage to even possibly try to apologize for what he's caused. And then the pod starts filling up with frozen air and it starts freezing over, and then the credits roll, and it's like, woof. So as I understand it, there is one alternate ending. I have not looked it up. I just finished the game last night, and it was, again, enough to make me go and just fall asleep, because I was like, man, fuck that guy. Fuck Jimmy. It's a great game. It's a really engrossing, heavy experience. If you're not in the mood for something like that, stay away. But if you can handle it, I think it's got some amazing... Oh my god, the soundscape. So I am the type of person... This is a psychological horror. There isn't much in the way of jump scares. Very, very sparse throughout the game. I actually think one of them was self-inflicted by me being a little silly. I am the type of person who, yeah, visuals can maybe get a little jump out of me, but what really, really pushes me is sound. If the sound is really overbearing, it can be like when I was playing Silent Hill, and Silent Hill has these moments where the soundtrack just descends into this industrial like orgy of just and if there's any kind of spooky stuff happening on screen, there were moments where I had like playing that game where I would have to like pause to like, I have to give myself a break from the music because the visuals are not nearly as powerful for me, but sound really sets something off in my mind. I find sound to be a lot more potent for horror, personally. Some people are the opposite, but I am definitely like, this game has a very intense soundscape sometimes, and it did reach the point where I had to like pause a few times and just like exhale because it was getting a little overwhelming for me. In a good way. Very effective for what it's trying to do, but just like, woof. The way that it builds atmosphere, so much darkness. I love the moments where you kind of realize that you'll open a door and you're like, uh-oh, we're in a hallucination. This is not how this is supposed to look. The colors are so just fill you with dread. Everything before, there's this big view screen in the lounge, and it usually plays like a sunny blue sky, and then after the crash, it's a sunset. And so much of the game is like this orange amber haze of like orange and shadow, and it feels so it just bears down on you. It's so suffocating at points, and just the worse that things get on the ship, it is a really claustrophobic feeling game. For one, because there's just some tight hallways, but also just the tone that just descends around everything is just it. The atmosphere is so thick and oppressive, and the music is this like will frequently go into this distorted, heavy, weird digital noises and industrial machinery and things that you don't know what the hell that is. And it's such a down game. It's a very dour game, but to such great effect. Anything else I really want to talk about? It has these like, is this very like nice, simple graphical style, kind of low poly, but very expressive characters with like the facial textures. The scant puzzles that are there are pretty easy, just kind of there to be doing something. I think it's fine. Kind of paces the game out. In certain cases, like the cake baking scene, it really serves to like drag out like the anxiety about having to tell them. Really good game. Great characters. one neat thing is that there's no voice acting, except for the mascot character, which are just like basically just pre-recorded lines. And the fact that there's no voice acting, I was reading a couple little interpretations of a couple things. And someone pointed out that it means that you can read the same line of dialogue in a couple different ways, because depending on kind of where you place emphasis, it can have very different meanings and how the character says it. Really interesting game. I love games like this that are these tight, focused experiences that use the interactive elements to great effect, that have it has a great atmosphere, really interesting characters, very likable, or I would say engaging characters, and a really fascinating narrative and a perspective about someone who, from the perspective of someone who just cannot admit to their own faults. It's almost perfect that the game is told out of order because it takes so long. It's almost like the way that Jimmy would tell the story. Like, it would take forever for him to get around to the part where actually he did that, and actually he did this, and he did this other thing. Yeah, great game. I mean, the more I talk about it, the more things I find to appreciate. I would totally check it out. It is from how big is this developer? Have they done other things? Store page. This is by a dev named Wrong Organ. They have another game called How Fish Is Made. Is that Curly? I'm seeing like Curly in one of the Steam screenshots. Interesting. Okay, so they've got one other game from 2022, and Mouthwashing just came out September 26th. That can't be right. September. It's November. Okay. Yes, I would totally check it out. It is $13 on Steam. I think it's well worth the money. I think it was even on sale a little while ago. I would totally check it out. Fantastic horror experience. And just as we are heading to the 3-hour mark, I think I'm going to call this to a close.